General Bipin Rawat. On December 8, 2021, India's Chief of Defense Staff boarded an Air Force Mi-17V5 in Tamil Nadu. With him were his wife, his defense advisor, and 11 others, 14 in total. They were flying 50 miles to the Staff College at Wellington. Descending toward it, the aircraft entered cloud over forested hills. The pilot lost sight of the ground. The investigation found he became spatially disoriented, no longer able to reliably read what his instruments were telling him. It struck a hillside 6.2 miles from its destination and caught fire. Soldiers and local residents found the wreckage burning in dense jungle. Bodies were carried up the slopes by hand. 13 died at the site. The only survivor, Group Captain Viren Singh, was pulled out alive with severe burns. He died a week later. Turbine 33. On June 28, 2005, a 4-man Navy SEAL team was compromised on Sautalo Sar in eastern Afghanistan. Surrounded, outnumbered, taking fire, 2 MH-47 Chinooks of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment were sent. 2 Apache gunships were assigned as escort. The Apaches were slower. Turbine 33 outran them and went in without armed cover because the men on the ground were running out of time. As it flared over the ridgeline and the SEALs moved to fast rope down, a rocket-propelled grenade was fired from close range. It came in through the open rear ramp. The Chinook went into the mountainside. All 16 were killed. 8 Night Stalker aviators, 8 SEALs. 3 of the 4 men on the ground died too. The worst loss for naval special warfare since the Second World War. Recovery teams reached the site weeks later. The slope was burned black. A ranger picked a dog tag out of the wreckage with no name on it, just the warrior ethos. Mull of Kintyre. On the evening of June 2, 1994, Royal Air Force Chinook ZD-576 lifted from Aldergrove near Belfast for Inverness. On board were 25 passengers and 4 crew. The passengers were almost the entire senior intelligence establishment for Northern Ireland. MI5, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, senior army officers. They were flying to a security conference 2 months before the IRI ceasefire. They were flying because the roads were worse. Moving men like that by car in Northern Ireland in 1994 was the greater risk. The weather on the Mull is often fog. That evening, it was fog. The Chinook flew into the hillside near the lighthouse. All 29 were killed. The Royal Air Force found the 2 pilots grossly negligent. That verdict stood for 17 years while the families fought it. In 2011, a review concluded it could not be justified. The Air Force's own airworthiness staff had considered the Chinook's new engine control software unverifiable, and a technical fault could not be ruled out. The verdict was set aside. The cause has never been established. Extortion 17. Just past 2 in the morning on August 6, 2011, 2 United States Army CH-47D Chinooks lifted out of a base in Logar Province, Afghanistan, flying with no exterior lights, navigating by night vision, heading 20 miles west into the Tangi Valley. Hours earlier, Rangers had gone in after a senior Taliban commander. They took the compound. He got out into the surrounding terrain. He was still out there. The Rangers called for a quick reaction force. Extortion 17 was the response. On board were 30 American Special Operations personnel, 7 Afghan commandos, an interpreter, and a military dog. 22 of the Americans were from SEAL Team 6. The Taliban were waiting. Fighters had set up on the upper floor of a 2-story building, 722 feet south of the landing zone. As the Chinook came down toward the valley floor, they fired. The first grenade missed. The second struck the rear rotor system. The rear pylon tore off the fuselage and control went immediately. It hit the ground at full rotor speed. Everyone died instantly. 38 people and the dog. It is still the greatest single loss of American life in the Afghan war. The disaster of the 54. On the evening of May 10, 1977, an Israeli Air Force CH-53 was flying a training exercise in the Jordan Valley, north of Jericho. On board were 44 soldiers, most of them paratroopers, and 10 crew. The exercise was a night flight at low altitude over a wadi, a dry riverbed cut into the valley floor. There were no lights below. Nothing to tell the crew how close the ground was. The pilot flew into the terrain. The aircraft struck a hillside and exploded. All 54 were killed. Investigators recorded the cause as controlled flight into terrain. A working aircraft, nothing wrong with it, flown into the ground by a crew who did not know the ground was there. No warning, no failure, no hostile action. the Israeli helicopter disaster. On February 4th, 1997, two Israeli Air Force CH-53s were carrying troops into the security zone in southern Lebanon. Tail number 357 took 33 soldiers and 4 crew. Tail number 903 took 32 and 4. They were combat infantry, most in their late teens and early 20s, going out on a routine rotation to 2 separate outposts. At 6:48 in the evening, both lifted from Rosh Pina, seconds apart. Different landing zones, but the same corridor in the dark. At 6:56, both reported crossing into Lebanon. 2 minutes later, air traffic control lost radar contact with both at once. The main rotor of 357 had struck the tail of 903. Both came apart and fell 600 feet. Both burned on impact. All 73 soldiers and crew were killed. It is the worst disaster in the history of the Israel Defense Forces. What followed was not a technical inquiry. Israelis began asking publicly why their sons were in southern Lebanon at all. A protest movement started by 4 mothers demanded withdrawal. 3 years later, Israel withdrew. Khankala. On August 19, 2002, a Russian Mi-26 flew from Mozdok toward the military base at Khankala, outside Grozny in Chechnya. The Mi-26 is the largest helicopter ever put into production. Its maximum troop capacity is 80. On board were 5 crew and 142 soldiers and officers. The Second Chechen War had been running 3 years. Chechen fighters had become expert at mining the supply routes, and soldiers were refusing to travel by road. So the Mi-26 became the way in and out, and it was routinely loaded far past its limits. Reports described men sitting on crates of ammunition, packed into every available inch. At noon, as it descended toward the base, fighters outside the perimeter fired a shoulder-launched heat-seeking missile into one of the engines. An aircraft carrying nearly twice its rated load went into an uncontrolled descent. It came down inside the perimeter into a minefield that formed part of the base's own defenses. It burst into flames. Fuel flooded the interior. The doors jammed. 5 crew and 29 passengers got out through a small hatch in the cockpit. That was all of them. Men who ran from the wreckage set off anti-personnel mines. Some who survived the crash were killed by their own defenses trying to get clear. 14 more died over the following days from burns. Of the 147 on board, 127 were killed. It is the deadliest helicopter crash in aviation history. Russian troops swept the area. All they recovered was the empty launch tube. 3 Russian officers were convicted, not over the missile. The charge was knowingly allowing an aircraft to carry more than twice its permitted passengers. The missile brought the helicopter down. The overloading killed most of the men inside it.